In the quiet sweep of prehistory, before the written word traced the fears and dreams of humanity, a pale light hung over the earth. It was a light that belonged to no man, no fire, no forge, a silver sentinel rising from the dark. The moon, constant and distant, cast its glow across forests, rivers, and plains, and in that light, the earliest humans felt themselves both seen and observed. It was a presence that demanded attention, though its gaze was silent, patient, and eternal. Beneath its reflection, the world seemed larger, lonelier, and subtly altered. Shadows stretched unnaturally, whispering that the familiar could become unknowable. And in this glow, the mind began to stir. The lunar cycles were noticed before they were named. Paleolithic people tracked the waxing and waning crescent across the night sky, not merely as a measure of time, but as a pulse of life itself. Tides responded, animals shifted, and nocturnal creatures, predators and prey alike, altered their behaviors in rhythm with its orbit. Humanity, ever observant and ever fearful, began to wonder if this rhythm also moved them, if some unseen force in the moonlight reached into the recesses of thought and feeling. In the faint shimmer on river stones, in the dim illumination of open plains, the first awareness of night's power took root. This awakening was not violent, not immediate. It was a whisper that rose like mist, felt in the twitching of eyelids, in restless sleep, in fleeting anxiety beneath the trees. But for those living without the comforts of fire or community walls, the night was vast and unpredictable. Wolves howled across distant hills, the cries of nocturnal beasts carried in the wind, and humans learned early that the dark could both nurture and threaten. The moon, constant in its path, became a counterweight to this uncertainty. It was a source of illumination, yes, but also a mirror. In its pale reflection, men could glimpse their own fragility, their own impulses, and a shadowed self that daylight did not know. In the earliest myths that survived in memory and oral tradition, the moon was not merely celestial, it was relational. Spirits, ancestors, and unseen presences were imagined to rise with its glow. In some cultures, it was a protector, guiding hunters along rivers and through forests. In others, it was a harbinger, signaling danger, madness, or upheaval. Across continents, humans looked upward and found both order and anxiety, a pattern in the cycles of light and darkness, a rhythm to life itself, and yet an ever-present reminder of vulnerability. Yet beyond the myth, beyond ritual and story, there was something physiological, almost inevitable. The human body is attuned to rhythms. Sleep cycles, hormone production, emotional sensitivity. Long before anyone understood circadian biology, our ancestors felt subtle shifts in mood, in energy, in behavior, as the moon passed through its phases. Nights of full illumination brought alertness and unease, sometimes exhilaration, sometimes restlessness. Men noticed a surge of emotion, an impatience, a tension. Women, too, recorded these rhythms through reproductive cycles and communal knowledge. Without naming it, humanity had observed a connection between the moon's phases and human experience, what would much later be called lunacy, or lycanthropy, or moon madness. The moon was not a villain, nor a force of cruelty. It was a mirror, a stage, a rhythm that amplified what already existed within the human mind. In its light, the veil between instinct and consciousness thinned. The thoughtful hunter, the wary farmer, the quiet observer in the trees, all became aware that the night and its silver watchmen were not neutral. They were forces that demanded acknowledgement, that highlighted the thin line between reason and impulse, vigilance and panic, community and isolation. It is here, in the subtle shaping of human consciousness, that the story of moon madness begins. Not as a single act of transformation, but as a slow recognition that night could awaken what daylight subdued. In ancient graves, in the art of early peoples, in ceremonial circles traced upon the earth, the influence of the moon is faintly visible. Pale ochres and stone markings suggest cycles, reverence, and observation. The moon was a guide, a measure of time, a pulse of the seasons, and yet always more. It was a witness to the small violences of human life. Arguments, thefts, aggression born of hunger or fear. It was a witness to ecstasy, celebration, and secret rites. In all of this, the moon observed silently, a silver eye in the sky, indifferent to human triumph or despair, yet intimately connected to the rhythms of both. Ultimately, the night, watched over by the eternal silver sentinel, holds both beauty and menace, and in its quiet illumination, humanity first glimpsed the capacity for madness that resides in every heart. The moon's glow falls softly on the earth, yet in that soft light, shadows grow longer than any daylight casts. Forests seem deeper, rivers more secretive, and the contours of the land whisper of what lies just beyond perception. Humanity, in its earliest nights, learned that these shadows were not mere absence of light, they were reflections of uncertainty, magnified by the silver watcher above. The lunar cycles became a silent script, instructing not just the growth of crops or the migration of animals, but the rhythm of human emotion itself. Across Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley, civilizations tracked the waxing and waning of the moon with meticulous care. Calendars, religious rituals, and festivals revolved around its cycles, revealing an instinctive understanding that the night and its glow carried meaning beyond the material. Full moons marked feasts and sacrifices. New moons were days of quiet reflection. And yet, embedded within these observances was a recognition of something darker, a subtle disquiet that came with each rise of the moon. Men and women alike felt themselves altered, their judgments shadowed, their impulses quickened, and their fears magnified by the silver light. Animals responded first, and humanity watched with fascination and fear. Wolves howled in the forest, their cries echoing under the lunar brilliance. Herds of deer became restless. Birds shifted in timing and behavior. Humans, keen observers, began to associate these signs with portents. In the dim illumination, the natural world seemed more vivid, more chaotic, more alive, and this intensity was mirrored within human hearts. Anxiety and aggression appeared to rise with the moon, a phenomenon recorded in early chronicles and whispered in the oral stories of countless cultures. Lunar shadows did not only fall upon the physical world, they fell upon the mind. The night became a canvas on which desires, fears, and suppressed impulses were painted in sharper relief. Scholars in later centuries would describe these fluctuations with precise language: mania, lunacy, sleepwalking. But the earliest witnesses felt only the trembling of the self, the sense that under the moon, their own consciousness could betray them. The shadows of the night were a teacher, reflecting both the order and chaos inherent in the human condition. Even rituals designed to protect against nocturnal madness testified to a deep awareness of this influence. Amulets, prayers, chants, and circadian observances were not mere superstition. They were early strategies to navigate the tension between instinct and intellect, to manage the surge of emotion and behavior that the full moon seemed to provoke. In these traditions, the moon was at once a guide and a provocateur, illuminating both the beauty and danger of life after dark. Thus, humanity's fascination with lunar shadows was not merely aesthetic. It was a recognition that the silver light above magnified what already lay within: desire, fear, courage, and fragility. To live beneath the moon was to acknowledge that the night had its own rhythms, and that these rhythms were inseparable from the human mind. Shadows, both literal and metaphorical, taught the earliest lessons of lunar influence, a prelude to the madness, myth, and legend that would follow. By the medieval period, the moon's influence had entered the meticulous records of scholars, physicians, and chroniclers. Villages kept rudimentary diaries of nights when tempers flared and violent acts multiplied, noticing that full moons coincided with the inexplicable eruption of irrational behavior. Theft, aggression, and delirium became woven into tales of nocturnal upheaval, giving rise to the earliest concept of lunacy. These observations were neither fanciful nor careless. They were an attempt to make sense of a recurring human pattern, one that suggested the celestial had power over the terrestrial, and that the mind could be reshaped by light it could not control. Physicians of the era, often trained in both medicine and astrology, postulated that the tides of bodily humors could be manipulated by the pull of the moon, just as the oceans themselves rose and fell. Blood, bile, and melancholy were all suspected to move with lunar cycles, creating moments when judgment faltered and passions ignited. The full moon became a silent accomplice to transgression, yet also a symbol of fascination, a force whose influence was both feared and revered. Men and women under its gaze were more than observers. They were participants in a cosmic experiment, unknowingly enacting the patterns written in silver above. The psychological effect was no less profound. Communities recorded the same cycles in whispered stories. Villagers disappearing in fits of anger or despair, travelers caught in inexplicable panic, and children more restless under the glow. It was in these moments that the moon revealed a truth about human nature, that reason and impulse are fragile companions, and that illumination, even gentle, can reveal what darkness suppresses. Madness, in this sense, was not the product of a curse or a demon. It was the reflection of human vulnerability, heightened by a celestial rhythm beyond comprehension. Medieval art and literature immortalized these ideas. Manuscripts depicted figures writhing under the moon, animals transforming, and men driven to violence or delirium. Lycanthropy and other supernatural transformations were framed as extensions of observable behavior, grounded in fear, superstition, and careful observation of repeated patterns. In these stories, the night became a theater of human emotion, and the moon its director, revealing not monsters of flesh, but monsters within the psyche itself. As the centuries progressed, scholars attempted classification: lunatics, dreamers, sleepwalkers. Yet in every observation, a sense of awe persisted. Madness was inseparable from mystery, and the moon remained a symbol of the unseen forces guiding human emotion. Nights of illumination were both spectacle and caution, moments when the silver light above revealed the tensions that simmered beneath social order and civilized restraint. Thus, in the medieval imagination, the moon was a mirror, a catalyst, and a teacher. It illuminated the boundaries of reason, revealing how thin and tenuous the structures of civility truly were. Madness in the light of the moon was not supernatural. It was a shadow cast by human nature itself, magnified and mirrored by a celestial rhythm older than civilization. And in this recognition, humanity took its first steps toward understanding the delicate, unsettling dance between mind, body, and night. Legends across Europe speak of men who became wolves, not metaphorically, but literally under the full moon. These stories, recorded in folklore, legal cases, and local chronicles, reveal more than fear. They reveal an attempt to grapple with the darkness that resides within all men. Lycanthropy, as these tales were later called, was both literalized and moralized, a narrative scaffold on which communities hung their anxieties about violence, desire, and transgression. The night, illuminated by silver, revealed the animal hidden beneath the civilized surface. Anthropologists and historians suggest that these myths were not mere fiction. Rituals, frenzies, and nocturnal violence were observed, often tied to hunger, isolation, or neurological conditions, yet communities chose mythic frameworks to explain behavior. The wolf became a symbol, the night a stage, and the moon a spotlight that revealed impulses otherwise contained. The transformation was as psychological as it was symbolic, reflecting fears of inherited darkness, impulsive desire, and the precariousness of social order. Folklore gave these impulses shape. Tales of hunters disappearing, neighbors attacking neighbors, and entire villages in terror were framed with the same recurring motif: the full moon awakens the beast within. These narratives were cautionary, instructive, and ritualized. They taught communities to respect the night, to monitor the restless, and to temper impulses that daylight had masked. In the mirror of legend, the wolf and the human were inseparable. One reflected the other, and both were always under the watchful eye of the moon. The night became a laboratory of human fear, a testing ground for impulses both inherited and emergent. As centuries passed, medical and legal authorities would struggle to reconcile observation with superstition, but the underlying truth remained. The moon illuminates not only the earth, but the interior landscapes of mind and heart. What is hidden during the day may emerge when silver light falls, and the beast within, whether real, imagined, or physiological, cannot be ignored. Thus, the story of the beast is not one of monstrous outsiders, but of humanity itself. Every howl in the forest, every unexplained act of aggression, every restless night speaks to an enduring recognition. that the moon, in its pale and patient light, reveals what civilization attempts to conceal. The beast is us, and the night is the mirror. In the dim corridors of medieval villages, when smoke rose from hearths and lamps flickered against the walls, the moon cast a pallor that was both gentle and unsettling. Silver light spilled across rooftops and streets, touching the earth with a quiet authority. To the villagers, this light was alive. It fell unevenly, revealing cracks in stone, the tremor of branches, the restless movements of animals, and with them it illuminated the shadowed impulses of men. Beneath this glow, small crimes and unspoken fears gained weight. Sudden quarrels, fleeting desires, and long-suppressed anxieties became visible, if only for a moment, in the silvered night. Rituals emerged as a response. Villagers hung protective charms in windows, whispered prayers to ward off spirits, and kept communal fires burning late into the night. Blood, both literal and symbolic, became a medium through which humans sought to negotiate the unseen forces of the night. Folklore recorded acts of theft and violence, linking them to the rising moon, and yet these stories were far more than superstition. They were a mirror, reflecting the turbulence of human emotion amplified by lunar illumination. Chroniclers and clerics, writing with care and reverence, noted the recurrence of moon nights, when human behavior strayed from expected norms. Men were restless, women more cautious, and the young often experienced vivid dreams and night terrors. These observations became encoded in myths. Men transformed into wolves, restless spirits wandered, and the boundaries between human and beast blurred. Blood and folklore intertwined, revealing the understanding that human nature, when exposed to the nocturnal stage, could become unpredictable and dangerous. The silver light above did not cause madness, but it acted as an amplifier. Tension, frustration, and desire, held in check during daylight, found expression under lunar illumination. Communities learned to respect the night, to watch over one another, and to mark its phases in ritual and celebration. Each act of precaution, each tale of nocturnal transgression, was a way of interpreting the unseen influence of the heavens upon human life. Even across regions, from rural England to the Alps, similar patterns emerged. Tales of lunacy, nocturnal frenzy, and strange transformations were recorded in parallel, suggesting that human responses to the night and its silver light were universal. Blood, both in ritual and in accidental conflict, became a symbol of the tension between instinct and civility. In these practices, the moon was both participant and observer, silent yet powerful, reflecting humanity's hidden vulnerabilities. By the Renaissance, these practices and stories had evolved. Folk medicine, astrology, and early psychology began to investigate the apparent connection between lunar phases and human behavior. Amulets gave way to physicians' advice, charms were catalogued alongside botanical remedies, and rituals were interpreted through the lens of emerging science. Yet the underlying insight remained. The moon illuminated both the external world and the internal landscape of emotion, revealing impulses long hidden, desires unspoken, and fears unacknowledged. In the end, blood and folklore were never separate. They were two threads woven into a single tapestry of understanding. Communities, confronted with the mysteries of night, sought to interpret behavior, protect the vulnerable, and codify what they observed into story and ritual. And through it all, the moon watched silently, a silver eye that witnessed not just human deeds but the subtle oscillations of the human heart, the impulses of anger, fear, and longing that would one day be called lunacy. Thus, beneath the patient gaze of the moon, humanity learned its first lesson, that the night is not empty, and that the silvery glow does not merely illuminate the earth, but the intricate, fragile, and often dangerous workings of the human mind. The night is not merely absence, it is presence, amplified and aware. Beneath a full moon, the world transforms. Trees cast elongated shadows, streets appear unervingly empty, and the cries of distant animals penetrate the silence with urgent insistence. Early observers noted something peculiar. Behavior shifted. Men walked faster, spoke louder, or were overcome with sudden irritability. Women noticed restlessness in the household, and the young became unsettled, sometimes wandering, sometimes silent. eyes wide at midnight became both a metaphor and a reality, a symbol for the sharp clarity with which human impulses were revealed under lunar light. Chroniclers in Europe, from village clerics to municipal scribes, began to record patterns. Crime spiked, accidents were more frequent, and the night seemed to carry a tension not present in daylight. The moon's illumination was not supernatural. It was revelatory. By shedding light in darkness, it revealed the thin, often fragile barrier between reason and instinct. Actions that might have been suppressed during the day emerged in the night, raw and unmediated. Observation became both practical and moral. Communities watched, recorded, and adapted. This attentiveness to the night was not purely reactive. It reflected an understanding of human psychology long before psychology existed. Restlessness, heightened emotion, impulsivity, all were observed empirically, noted in patterns and encoded in story. Folklore transformed these observations into myth. Men who became wolves, women haunted by spirits, children influenced by lunar tides. Every tale carried an undercurrent of truth, a reflection of what occurred when the night revealed impulses that daylight had concealed. In some regions, specific nights of the month were treated with caution. Full moons were avoided for travel, special vigils were held, and communal decision-making emphasized restraint and observation. Even sleep was ritualized. Doors were locked, fires kept burning, and children were tucked under layers of precaution. The night's influence was recognized in practical ways, long before scientific frameworks existed. Yet, despite caution, fascination endured. The night, illuminated by silver, inspired awe as much as fear. Poets, artists, and storytellers captured its duality, the beauty of moonlight and the chaos it illuminated. Eyes wide at midnight were a lens, both literal and symbolic, through which humans began to interpret not only external events but the inner landscape of thought and emotion. Restlessness, desire, and fear became intertwined with the lunar rhythm, a mirror of mind and cosmos alike. The night teaches humanity that illumination is not always comfort. The moon reveals impulses, magnifies emotion, and exposes vulnerabilities. It shows that reason is delicate, civilization is precarious, and the human mind is attuned to rhythms that extend far beyond conscious understanding. Under silver light, eyes wide at midnight witnessed both danger and revelation, setting the stage for the myths, laws, and psychological studies that would follow in centuries to come. In the moon's glow, humanity recognized itself, both fragile and powerful, tethered to instinct, yet capable of reflection. The night, once feared, became a mirror, and the eyes wide at midnight saw what had always been present, waiting for the illumination to reveal it. By the Renaissance, curiosity met observation in the candlelit studies of physicians, philosophers, and astrologers. The moon, distant and unchanging, became an object of scrutiny. Its influence on tides was known, its illumination carefully mapped. Yet scholars also noticed something less tangible. Behavior shifted under lunar light. Men acted with unusual fervor or restlessness. Women reported heightened tension in households. Children experienced vivid and troubling dreams. The moon was no longer just celestial. It was psychological, physical, and moral in its reach. Medical treatises of the era connected these observations to the humors: blood, phlegm, bile, and melancholy. Nights of full illumination were thought to disturb equilibrium, stirring emotion, agitation, and impulse. Astrological charts were consulted alongside observation of behavior, as learned men attempted to reconcile celestial mechanics with human experience. The moon became a laboratory, a natural experiment in the amplification of emotion, desire, and fear. Legal documents also reflect the awareness of lunar influence. Magistrates recorded crimes that coincided with full moons, noting patterns of violence, theft, and nocturnal disruption. Communities recognized that certain nights required vigilance, and scholars attempted to codify this knowledge. Observation, measurement, and analysis became intertwined with folklore, creating a bridge between myth and science, superstition and rational inquiry. In literature, the moon was celebrated and feared. Poets and chroniclers described nights when the restless could not sleep, when passions rose unchecked, and when reason faltered beneath silver light. These narratives acknowledged the duality of illumination. It revealed beauty, but also exposed the fragile, sometimes dangerous impulses of the human mind. Psychologically, these scholars were observing what we would now recognize as early insight into circadian rhythms, hormonal cycles, and sleep patterns. Yet even as they sought rational explanations, the moon retained its mystique. It remained a harbinger, a mirror, and a silent participant in human life, shaping perception and amplifying emotion with impartial authority. Ultimately, scholars in the moonlight documented the interplay between cosmos and mind, between celestial motion and human behavior. Their manuscripts, treatises, and observations preserved a deep recognition that the night and its silver illumination are inseparable from the rhythms of human thought, desire, and fear. The moon, distant yet intimately observed, continued to reveal truths both literal and symbolic, forging a path from myth toward understanding that would endure for centuries. Long before borders and nations were drawn, humans looked to the sky and found patterns mirrored in their own lives. The moon, constant and pale, was one such pattern, its waxing and waning observed, recorded, and mythologized across continents. From the fertile plains of Mesopotamia to the forests of Scandinavia, from the Nile's riverbanks to the far islands of Polynesia, legends emerged with uncanny similarity. In every culture, the moon became a storyteller, an agent of transformation, a symbol of both protection and peril. In Scandinavia, the full moon was said to awaken berserkers, warriors who, under its glow, were transformed into a whirlwind of fury, impervious to pain and driven by instincts deeper than reason. In Mesopotamia, lunacy was documented alongside astrological charts, with scribes meticulously noting nights of heightened agitation, emotional turmoil, and criminal acts. Across Polynesia, myths spoke of men and women driven by unseen lunar forces, compelled to wander, dream, or act in ways beyond their conscious control. The similarities are striking, suggesting that human responses to lunar illumination are not mere cultural coincidences, but reflections of shared physiology, perception, and imagination. These legends reveal more than fear. They encode observation, warning, and reflection. When a full moon rose, communities altered behavior. Fires burned brighter, watchmen kept vigil, and children were kept close. Storytelling itself became ritualized. Tales of transformation, of men into wolves, women haunted by spirits, or travelers compelled into madness, acted as both entertainment and instruction, illustrating the boundaries between social order and instinct. Every legend contained an implicit recognition. The night reveals what daylight hides, and silver light acts as a mirror, reflecting both the potential for beauty and the shadow of chaos within the human mind. Anthropologists studying these myths note their consistency across cultures and epochs. The moon's universal presence, its rhythmic cycle, and its ability to shape both perception and behavior created a shared symbolic vocabulary. Communities encoded empirical observation into myth. The moon influenced tides, animals, and humans alike, and its rise became a signal for vigilance, ritual, and reflection. These narratives blurred the line between observation and story, between reason and allegory, and in doing so, preserved a deep understanding of the subtle ways celestial forces intersect with the human psyche. Even in regions separated by thousands of miles, the moon's influence appears to have been interpreted similarly. Restlessness, nocturnal activity, and emotional flux were universally observed and ritualized. Legends reinforced caution, fostered social cohesion, and imparted cultural memory. Through myth, the moon became a teacher, a guide, and a mirror, a constant reminder that the night is never empty, that illumination brings revelation, and that the patterns of the heavens echo the patterns within our own minds. Ultimately, lunar legends across lands reveal humanity's enduring fascination with what lies just beyond perception. The moon illuminates the earth and the mind alike, exposing impulses, anxieties, and desires long held in check. It teaches that the night is both a stage and a mirror, that every culture has observed the same rhythms, and that the stories passed from generation to generation are as much about understanding ourselves as they are about interpreting the heavens. Darkness has always been more than the absence of light. Beneath a full moon, the night exerts a subtle yet undeniable authority over perception, emotion, and behavior. Every shadow is longer, every whisper sharper, every instinct heightened. Humans, living in societies bound by day, recognized early that night loosens the grip of civility and magnifies the impulses suppressed during light. Observers noted the restless, the anxious, the aggressive, and the dreamlike behaviors that flourished under silver illumination. This was no simple superstition. Chronically restless nights, unexplained violence, and unaccountable acts were recorded in municipal logs, church registers, and personal diaries. Men and women alike observed the same patterns. Moods shifted, tempers flared, and the restless stirred. The night's grip was subtle but persistent. To witness it was to understand that civilization is fragile, and that beneath the veneer of law and order lies an instinctive self, shaped by rhythm, perception, and fear. Communities developed strategies to negotiate this grip. Night watches, heightened vigilance, communal gatherings, and ritualized observances ensured that the restless could be monitored, protected, or contained. Sleep became an orchestrated practice. Doors were secured, fires kept burning, and children were tucked carefully. Even mundane routines were adapted in response to the patterns of nocturnal behavior. The night had agency, and humanity responded with caution, observation, and ritual. Psychologically, the night reveals the tension between reason and instinct. Darkness amplifies uncertainty and threat, but it also illuminates beauty, reflection, and empathy. Nights of heightened lunar illumination showcased both extremes. The surge of aggression in one man, the tenderness of care in another, the restless energy of a child, the prophetic dream of a seer. Human behavior is deeply sensitive to the rhythms of light and shadow, and the night's grip reminds us that civilization is only partially autonomous. Instinct, perception, and physiology remain at its core. Even as societies evolved, the night retained its authority. Urban planning, legal codes, and communal routines incorporated observations of nocturnal flux. By recognizing the night's grip, communities sought to harmonize human activity with the subtle patterns of the cosmos, acknowledging the persistent and invisible forces that shape behavior. In doing so, humans preserved a form of practical wisdom, encoded in folklore, ritual, and observation. Ultimately, the night's grip is not malevolent. It is revealing. It exposes the instincts, desires, and vulnerabilities that daylight conceals. Tests vigilance, patience, and self-knowledge. Beneath silver illumination, humanity learns to navigate both the external and internal worlds, discovering that night is a teacher, a mirror, and a stage upon which the hidden dimensions of life are laid bare. As human societies became more complex, the moon's influence found its reflection not only in folklore but in law. Judicial records from medieval Europe are replete with cases in which criminal acts coincided with full moons. Magistrates and scribes noted patterns. Thefts, assaults, and unexplainable behaviors appeared more frequent under lunar illumination. The moon, once a mythic presence, had become a subtle witness to human action, shaping both narrative and consequence. Courts wrestled with the implications. Could a man be held fully accountable for crimes committed during a night when rationality faltered? Was the moon a mitigating influence or an amplifying one? Legal frameworks were rudimentary, yet they reflected the human attempt to reconcile behavior with cosmic observation. Punishment and protection were intertwined. The law sought to enforce order, yet simultaneously recognized that the night and its illumination could awaken impulses beyond conscious control. Communities implemented preventative strategies. Night watches became a legal and social obligation. Public spaces were illuminated with torches or lanterns. Rituals persisted alongside legal measures, demonstrating that law and superstition coexisted in a symbiotic recognition of lunar influence. This blending of observation, mythology, and jurisprudence illustrates how deeply the moon had embedded itself in human consciousness, both as arbiter and mirror. Anthropologists note that these early laws reveal more than fear. They reveal observation, pattern recognition, and the attempt to manage the unpredictable. Laws were not arbitrary. They were responses to empirical evidence, codified into culture and ritual. Society, faced with the recurring influence of nocturnal unrest, adapted, incorporating lunar rhythms into the practical and moral fabric of life. The moon's role in law extended beyond Europe. In China, the lunar calendar dictated legal proceedings, festivals, and social expectation. In the Middle East, astrological influence informed judicial decisions. Across cultures, the moon acted as both metric and metaphor, a celestial witness to human activity and a reflection of the tensions inherent in instinct, morality, and social cohesion. Ultimately, the transition from folklore to law demonstrates the human impulse to understand and regulate behavior, even when that behavior is influenced by forces beyond perception. The moon illuminates not only the earth but the moral and psychological landscapes of its observers, reminding us that justice, like civilization itself, is inseparable from the rhythms of nature, observation, and the fragile human mind. The Enlightenment brought observation, measurement, and the beginnings of a scientific framework to human understanding. Scholars measured tides, mapped lunar phases, and recorded anomalies in human behavior with increasing precision. The moon, once a harbinger of myth and madness, became a subject of reason. Yet fascination endured. Even as empirical methods sought to explain, the moon retained its power to intrigue and unsettle. Physicians and early psychologists examined patterns of aggression, sleeplessness, and emotional fluctuation, noting subtle correlations with lunar cycles. Sleep studies, hormonal observations, and physiological inquiries began to demystify what folklore had long suggested. Nights of full illumination were not inherently dangerous, yet the mind and body respond in subtle, measurable ways to light, rhythm, and social expectation. Even as science advanced, the symbolic power of the moon persisted. Literature, theater, and cultural memory continued to associate silver light with transformation, restlessness, and revelation. The moon, it seemed, operated on two planes: empirical and symbolic, physiological and psychological. This duality preserved its role as both teacher and mirror, illuminating the interplay between cosmic rhythm and human behavior. The Enlightenment demonstrates that observation need not erase wonder. Scientific inquiry explained mechanisms, but human imagination maintained reverence. The moon's influence is not solely about effect, it is about reflection. It mirrors our curiosity, our fear, and the persistent question: what unseen forces shape thought and action? Even today, in the language we use and the stories we tell, the moon's grip remains, subtle but undeniable. In contemporary society, the moon has lost none of its symbolic resonance. While science demystifies lunar influence, folklore and language preserve its power. Words like lunatic and moonstruck endure, echoing centuries of observation and imagination. Even in the digital age, full moons evoke attention, fascination, and superstition, reminding us that human psychology remains sensitive to rhythms both environmental and cultural. Modern psychiatry recognizes sleep cycles, hormonal patterns, and environmental stimuli, yet the cultural memory of moon madness persists. Festivals, storytelling, and literary imagery continue to associate lunar phases with heightened emotion, introspection, and unpredictability. The moon serves as a bridge between observation and imagination, physiology and narrative, fact and myth. Beyond the physiological, the moon endures as a psychological mirror. Its cycles encourage reflection, prompting consideration of our impulses, fears, and desires. It reminds us that behavior is multifaceted, influenced by forces both internal and external, and that even in a society governed by reason, the night retains a measure of mystery, authority, and revelation. The moon teaches that observation alone is insufficient. Human experience is shaped as much by perception, expectation, and imagination as by empirical reality. The night, illuminated by silver, continues to challenge understanding, revealing the depths of human fragility, curiosity, and imagination. Ultimately, the story of moon madness is a story of humanity itself. Beneath silver illumination, instincts emerge, fears surface, and desires reveal themselves with unflinching clarity. The night is a mirror, reflecting both the beauty and danger inherent in consciousness. Civilizations, laws, rituals, and myths have all sought to interpret this reflection, yet the core truth remains. Humans are creatures of rhythm, light, and shadow, fragile yet resilient, instinctive yet reflective. The moon illuminates not just the earth, but the inner landscape of thought and emotion. Nights of silver light reveal the fine line between order and chaos, reason and impulse, civilization and the wilderness within. Folklore, law, science, and myth have all sought to capture this, each in its own language, yet all point to the same recognition. The night exposes what daylight conceals. In the end, the moon does not impose madness. It reveals it. Every surge of emotion, every restless impulse, every flicker of violence or insight is magnified, mirrored, and observed beneath its glow. The night is both stage and teacher, the moon both spotlight and witness. Humanity, confronted with this illumination, has learned lessons in fear, reflection, and reverence. And so, as the moon traces its eternal path across the sky, it continues to watch, to illuminate, and to mirror the restless, fragile, and endlessly fascinating heart of humanity.